on Tinder.
What does that mean?
It means that there's a lot of people on Tinder right now. A lot of bored souls looking for a Christmas mate.
Oh my god. All right, here we go. You ready?
Yep.
And in 3, 2, 1. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Team Morale Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan, and joining me, as always, he was just on Tinder, ladies and gentlemen, Mitch.
Oh, the swipe surge is going right now, people. Trying to find my holiday.
Holiday. Mitch is out here trying. If you are interested.
If you are interested, please contact me at Team Morale Pod.
Well, we are continuing our team just deep dives on this podcast today. We're doing Mitch's team.
What?
Oh, like you didn't know.
We're doing the Blazers? I am so unprepared.
But this is a favorites podcast because we are doing your favorite team and we're drinking my favorite whiskey. And because it's my favorite whiskey, I thought I would do the research on the whiskey this time.
Go ahead.
We have Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. Yes, it's the bitchiest whiskey you can find, but it is my favorite. It was founded by Jasper Newton Daniel, who was born in 1850. They call him Jack, and he had 10 siblings.
Jack Daniel had 10 siblings?
Yep.
Wow.
But that was with his dad's first wife.
Oh.
There's more. His mom unfortunately died, and his dad remarried and had 3 more kids.
Oh, wow.
He was pumping them out.
Yeah, he couldn't help himself back then, I
Just,
guess.
what? But it was...
Not enough Trojans back then.
Not enough Trojans. Well, it is out of Lynchburg, Tennessee. It was founded in 1875, 145 years ago. And it's just the best.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I mean, so Jack Daniel, everyone knows Jack Daniels. It's one of the most popular whiskeys in the world. Everyone loves a good Jack and Coke. Jack Daniels by itself is already kind of a sweeter type of whiskey. That's why it usually pairs well with Coke. But Tennessee Honey...
It's candy.
It is
it's
candy.
It's alcoholic candy.
It takes sweetness to a whole nother level.
It is alcoholic candy. I only have 4 ice cubes
wow,
in this one.
We took one away.
A couple podcasts ago, you said that I was going to get down to 3. Well, if you get me with Tennessee Honey, you've got me down to 4.
Down to 4. That's an improvement. Yeah, it's one of the... It is as easy as sipping whiskey as you will find. If you're like a whiskey aficionado, quote unquote, you probably won't like it because, yeah, it is so sugary, it is so whiskey.
It's literally candy.
If you just want to like sit down and not have to pre-make a drink and just put some Tennessee Honey in a glass with some ice and it tastes like candy.
It's so good.
Yes. Yeah, I am a big fan. I am a big fan of it. Not as big a fan as you, though.
It's my favorite. But we have to get into your team. We've talked about my favorite a little bit. Let's get into your favorite.
All right.
I'm first going to talk to you about your Blazers fandom. Okay. Where did it come from? Why are you a Blazers fan? And just what led you to where you're at?
Okay, so I was born in the mid-90s, and my first real memories, I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and spent majority of my life in Portland. Love Portland, Oregon. It's an amazing city, and because the Blazers, the Timbers didn't even come around until I was probably in junior high or high school.
The Timbers being the soccer team.
Being the MLS soccer team, which for us is like our second pro sports team, and people still go wild over the Timbers. But the Blazers are really the only pro sports team we had when I was growing up. That on top of me loving basketball and playing basketball and that being my number one sport. And I was blessed enough to have my grandpa, whose company had a suite at the Blazer games, and I got to go to about as many games as I could growing up, and it was an amazing experience. Prayers up to Grandpa Chet, love him very much. The fact that he was allowed me to go to as many games as I went to, and I got to be the half court ball kid that like gave the game ball to. It was against the Knicks, and I got to give the game ball to Stephon Marbury, and our team captains at the time were Darius Miles and Joel Prisbilla. and I got to like be the kid that like got to catch all of the shots and warm ups and pass them back out to the guys and stuff. And so it was like I just was so ingrained in Portland and with the Trailblazers and with just basketball in general that it really had an affliction on me. And so growing up, the Blazers are 100% my favorite team, any sport, bar none. I still love football. I still love baseball. I still am like an avid sports watcher, but there's nothing that feels as close to me as the Trailblazers, especially now that I got to work for them this entire last season. I got to be their sports broadcast intern. I got to work directly underneath the producer and director, and it was an amazing experience. So I feel very close to the Blazers in my heart. They're the team I follow the most, and there never really will be a team that I feel as connected to as I do with the Blazers.
Absolutely. And you bleed the Blazers.
I do.
Anyone who's met Mitch knows that there is not, if you can have a conversation with Mitch that the word Blazer isn't said.
What are you talking about the Blazers?
Just mark that down on your phone or put a little tally mark somewhere because you won't find a lot of them. Top Blazer moments, like from your fandom growing up, where some of your coolest Blazer moments?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to start off with Dame's .9 buzzer beater against the Rockets.
That won them the series.
It was
Game 6.
Yes. So it was Game 6. If we'd lost that, it pretty much was a sealed deal that in Game 7 we're going to go back to Houston and we probably would have lost. And I remember, so I was on a Christian mission trip and I was in Argentina and I didn't have very much Wi-Fi and I was trying to watch it as best as I could. And I just as the last shot came, like it was perfect screen and everything, and I'm in a bunkhouse with 4 other guys, and Dame makes a shot, and I can't yell or anything, so I'm just like, oh, like one tear's coming out of my eye. I'm just like, Damian Lillard. That definitely is up there. I would say the draft with Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge, that totally changed the entire trajectory of the Trailblazers, where we went from being the Jailblazers to being like a reputable team with real all-stars like Aldridge and Roy. That was also up there. Obviously, the half-court shot over Paul George is a huge one for me. And I remember growing up and watching Damon Stoudemire and Arvydas Sabonis. Those were 2 of my favorite Blazers growing up watching us get to the conference finals. It's a bummer that we fell apart in the 2000 finals like we did, but I was only 6 or 7 years old that year, and it still is a memory that is burned into my brain as like a great season, a great team that passed the ball a lot. So yeah. Those are probably some of my best Blazer moments. Most of them have to do with Damian Lillard, though, because that is a bad, bad man.
That guy is one of the best players to ever pick up a basketball. That guy can literally, he doesn't have emotions. He just kills people. That's what he does.
He just goes out there. He's like the Michael Jordan meme. He was like, and so I was offended by that. And so anyways,
and so I took
50.
that personally. But yes, the Blazers are definitely one of the more lovable teams in the NBA. They've never really, at least of late, they've definitely always been a team where everyone's like, the Blazers. Yeah. No one hates the Blazers.
Yeah, it's hard to hate the Blazers.
I will never forget, and I'm trying to look up the exact game when it happened, but the Mavs in 2011, they were playing the Blazers in the first round, and the Mavs are up big in a game. I think it was game 3. I'm pretty sure it was game 3.
Are you talking about the Brandon Roy game?
Yes, and Brandon Roy was like, wait, we're going to lose? Nah, fam. And just literally was like in the fourth quarter was like, all right, everything I touch is going to go in the hoop, by the way.
So I have rewatched the highlights of this game probably 10 times. Brandon Roy is already on his way out. He has pretty much destroyed the cartilage in his knees. Going into the NBA, it's actually why he fell down the draft to 7 when we actually drafted him. He probably would have been a number 1 or number 2 pick because he was so good when he was at Washington. But he had a bunch of medical red flags because the cartilage in his knees were going. This was the year where it was really like he's been out all season. He didn't fit into the style that we were going, and he wasn't the guy anymore. Aldridge was really kind of turning himself into the guy. Roy comes back for the playoffs and we were dead in the water zone with the Mavs because the Mavs were so good that year. I mean, they went on to win the championship. We and the Heat were the only 2 teams to push you to 6 games.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that, but in the first round, we pushed it to 6 games, and one of them was because of Game 3, Brandon Roy, and he just went off in the fourth quarter. In his third and specifically the fourth quarter, it just was like, it was so sweet watching a guy who clearly was on the back end, even though he's only 24 or 25 at the time, was on the back end of his career because his knees were just going and just go off like that. That is another great memory. I'm really glad you brought that one up.
Yeah,
because
it was...
Another real quick, I was there for a game where he hit a half-court game-winning buzzer beater in the playoffs, just like Dame did against the Rockets. And I remember being on the Max, which is like our public transit, and everyone was chanting, "Let's go Blazers," for like 30 minutes afterwards. Brandon Roy is one of my all-time favorite Blazers for sure.
Yeah, the Blazers fandom, just the whole city of Portland just buys into the Blazers so much.
Yeah, we really do. It's a hard thing to describe. We really buy into our college sports, Oregon State and Oregon. We really buy into the Timbers. You give us a sport and we're just like, that is our team. I will fight you over this team. And most of the city feels that way.
Yeah, it's awesome. But before we've talked about a lot of nostalgia, let's get into the nuts and bolts. Let's talk about last season. Kind of a disappointment.
Absolutely.
But you guys probably dealt with some of the most injuries in the NBA.
Yes. So, we started off the season with Nurk isn't going to be back until, what was it? It turned into all the way through March. And I remember when he first had the injury, people were like, "Oh, he'll be back January." Okay, no, he won't be back till February. Okay, no, he won't be back till March. And literally the next game, which was against the Houston Rockets, it was on a Saturday. It was that Friday that the season got canceled due to one Rudy Gobert. He just had to touch the mics.
The Stifle Tower.
The Stifle Tower.
Stifling happiness.
So we played without Nurk the entire season. That by itself is a huge blow because he is arguably our second best player behind Dame. Right now, CJ is the second best scorer, but Nurk might be our second best player.
He's the anchor of your defense.
Yes.
And the underrated passer.
Yes, he is a huge reason why Dame, if you double team Dame on the pick and roll and you leave Nurk wide open at the high post, he's either going to make a long two or he's going to be able to pass out of it, and that's why you can't double Dame as much in the playoffs anymore.
Oh, don't get me wrong. The Mavericks in one of the bubble games were there was probably a stretch where it was 8 possessions in a row where it was Dame and Nurkic pick and roll, and we picked wrong every single. And I was like, Mavericks, can you figure this out, please? You're professional basketball players. But it wasn't even the Mavericks. It was just the fact that those two are so dangerous together.
Yeah, they are really, really good together. They're very good friends. They're really close to each other. So that duo by itself, not having Nurk all year, that was a bummer. That on top of Zach Collins went down in the third or fourth game of the entire season against the Mavericks. I don't know if you remember that, but he went up and Luka hit him in the shoulder and it messed his shoulder up, and so he had to have surgery, and it was kind of a point.
Luka's not strong enough to hurt people. I want you to know that. I wish he was.
Luka couldn't hurt a fly, right? So we lost Zach early in the season, and then later in the season, it's we picked up Melo. This will we'll gain a little traction, and then it was less than 10 games with Melo when Rodney tore his Achilles, and I remember watching as soon as it happened, I was like, well, that's an Achilles tear. No contact in the middle of a run, stretching his leg out. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I hope that he can come back and even be a fraction of what he was, because he was averaging 49% from 3, which was the highest in the league at the moment when he went down. So now we come back, and so last year definitely was a disappointment. When you have to have a starting lineup of CJ, Anthony, Mario Hezonja, Anthony Tolliver at your center, and Wenyen Gabriel, you're just like, oh my gosh, what has happened to our basketball team this year? It's this is not who we are supposed to be. I remember at the beginning of the season when literally people were talking championship, because it was oh, we brought Hassan Whiteside in. Mario's going to be the 10th guy off the bench. After we didn't even know Gary was going to pop off at the time, but it's we were looking at teams okay, I think that we were a Western Conference Finals team last year, and we could compete for at a very high level this year, and it just did not turn out that way. Lots of injuries, but also just underperforming.
Yeah, and it's tough. When you get hit with the injury bug like they did, all you have to do is weather the storm. And I don't think there's a team out there that weathered the storm and then came in and made the plays they needed to make, like the Blazers did. They played in like 15 straight playoff games.
Yeah.
And they played really well. I mean, they ran into the freight train that is the Lakers, but they played pretty well. I mean, they won the games they needed to. Dame, like we all said, he took that personally. And it was just one of those things where I was like, man, like you're pissing off everybody and everyone's pissing you off. Just calm down. But we have talked about last year. Last year, obviously, disappointment. There's a lot of injuries. There's a lot of things that needed to, be fixed. There were obvious holes in the roster going into last year, and after the injuries, they definitely showed holes in the roster. Made some moves this offseason. What are those moves, and what do you think about them?
So, backing up a little bit, the biggest problem that we definitely had going throughout this entire last season was our defense. So we actually had the second highest rating offense right behind the Dallas Mavericks, which is fairly surprising for a team that barely scratched the 8 seed.
It's all right. The Mavs were the 7 seed.
I guess
isn't that important.
I guess it's not all about offense. Weird. Okay, so we were one of the worst defensive teams, and a huge part of that was our perimeter defense. We couldn't guard the 3 for our lives. We had the highest opponent 3-point field goal percentage out of anyone in the entire league last year because they're just taking wide open threes. These are professional basketball players. They're just like wide open all the time. I don't think you should just assume that they're going to miss, which is pretty much what our entire defense was last year. So they went into this offseason and they're like, okay, so that is our biggest problem is perimeter defense. Who can we go in and add? Robert Covington, according to Neil O'Shea, was the number one guy on their list, and they had several different players that they were looking at with the Trevor Ariza and 2 first-round picks deal, and they offered that around a little bit, but they just jumped on it once the Rockets said that they would give Robert Covington up. Robert Covington is a guy who, back when he was playing with the Philadelphia 76ers in the process, I remember seeing, I was like, he is not only a great defender, but he is knocking down threes at a really high clip. Goes to the Timberwolves. And when he's playing with the Timberwolves, he actually was in the category of Defensive Player of the Year there for a minute. He was averaging close to 2 steals and 2 blocks a game. He gets injured, comes back. He still is playing really well, but clearly on a bad team, and so someone else is willing to give up more for him. The Rockets then at the deadline go and get Robert Covington. It's a great fit for them, especially as like a small ball 5 was what they're kind of doing, and he averaged 2 blocks a game at the time playing for the Rockets. And so when they actually traded him to us, I still don't think it makes any sense of why the Rockets did it in the first place. But I am so excited to have a guy like Robert Covington on our team.
Yeah, he's basically the perfect fit next to Dame. You have Dame and you have CJ, and that is like, you look at those two and you're like, a lot of offense, a lot of creation, but negative defense.
Yes.
Not a lot of defense coming out of those two. So that 3 spot needs to be basically you need to be able to cover for them on the defensive end. And you were starting Rodney Hood, you were starting Wendy and Gabriel, you were starting a lot of guys that are trying to find that spot. You found that guy in Robert Covington.
Yes. Robert Covington, I mean, like I was saying, he's the guy that I've wanted for so long because, well, all he does is play good defense. He doesn't play as good of straight up perimeter defense one-on-one against quicker guards, but he plays really good perimeter defense one-on-one against bigger wings, which we've always had a problem with. When you have guys like LeBron and when you have guys like Kawhi and Paul George and when you have guys like Luka that we're trying to get through to actually get to this point, then that is the big difficulty for us, is to try and stop those wings. And so now you bring in Robert Covington, who is a genuinely good defender.
He's lockdown.
Lockdown defender, which is exactly what we need, and he can shoot threes.
Yeah, and he's just one of those guys that, like, he doesn't do anything bad on the defensive end. Like, he covers for his defenders. He covers for his teammates. He can stop at the point of attack. He can block shots. He can get steals. Like, he does it all.
Yeah.
And he's not even the only ad of the offseason.
No, he was the first ad of the offseason. So we traded him for 2 first-rounders, which included our first-rounder this year and then our first-rounder next year. So we kind of avoided the stipend rule by doing that. And then our next pickup was with the mid-level exception. We went and got Derrick Jones Jr., who, when we first picked him up, was like, it's kind of an overpay. Derek Jones Jr.
It was an overpay.
He's been good. And
He's been good, not great. He's been a project. He's a project.
Yes. So
but he's, for the amount of money you gave him, you are expecting him to be more than what he was. And if he's not, it's an overpay.
Yes, absolutely. So we gave him the full mid-level. For people who don't know what that is, that's $9.3 million.
And the mid-level is what you get for being under the luxury tax.
Yes.
And at some point, we'll have a podcast that explains all this for those of you that don't know. But right now, basically, Derek Jones Jr. got a 1-year, $9 million deal.
Technically 2 years. Technically 2 years. I believe it's a player option on the second year, so he can leave us after this year if he wants. But I believe that the point was to bring him in, especially at this salary. And all our coaches and GMs have been talking about is that we're going to start Derek Jones Jr., which I'm a little flabbergasted at, but also I remember when we used to start Jake Layman. I remember we used to start Mo Harkless. Like, he's going to be a guy that is not going to finish games for us. It's probably going to be Melo, or it's probably going to be Gary Trent Jr. there at the end of games for us, but he's going to start games for us. He's going to have a whole ton of energy. His arms seem like they just go forever. His arms and his legs are just crazy long, and he has more bounce than any player in the history of the Trailblazers, maybe aside from Clyde Drexler.
Yeah, that guy can get up.
He can jump.
There are some dunks. If you ever need to see this, YouTube Derek Jones Jr. dunks, because
there's a million of them.
He can bang.
Yeah, which is something really exciting we've never had before. So he's going to be a really interesting addition, especially if they put him right in the starting lineup right off the bat. I think they're kind of hoping to bring some sort of Mo Harkless, Al-Farouq Aminu copy, but better with Derek Jones Jr. and Robert Covington. I think that's the general goal of it. I don't know if he actually sticks as the starting small forward or not. We're going to have to wait and see, but I do like that pickup. A pickup I like even more than that is in a 3-team trade, the Blazers got rid of Mario Hezonja, sent him to the Memphis Grizzlies, and then we picked up Enes Kanter.
Yeah, that was a big trade. I mean, basically you flipped Mario Hezonja for Enes Kanter straight up.
Yeah, I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where so they gave up that and got that. No, that can't be the whole thing. And we're sitting there waiting for the rest of the trade to complete, because how things work in the NBA is you get the big names, and then, the picks come later, and you kind of, hours later, you kind of piece together what actually happened. And this one, the dust settled, and you're like, wait, really?
Oh, hold on. So this trade originally started out on draft night as a trade between the Boston Celtics and the Memphis Grizzlies, and it was for the 30th pick, which was Desmond Bane to the Memphis Grizzlies. And that's really all the information we had. And then the day after, I got the tweet, I believe it was from Woj, that Enes Kanter was coming to the Blazers. Like, oh, how is that possible? That is awesome. They ended up sneaking their way in as a third team into that trade. Mario Hezonja got sent to the Grizzlies. I forget exactly what the Celtics got back in that trade. I think that they were kind of just trying to lose roster space.
I was about to say, the Celtics had so many draft picks and they didn't trade any of them, so they have to or I guess they did, but they needed to create roster spots for the people they drafted. So they were looking to offload older players.
Yes. So they got rid of their pick, the 30th pick, which for a lot of people that don't know, the 30th pick isn't valued as high as you might be because it is technically a first rounder, but with a first round pick, you have to lock in a player for a minimum of 2 years. If you're the Celtics, you're probably like, we don't need to bring in a 30th pick. We already had 2 more picks in the first round, and they're trying to bring guys back. So,
and you're like, if I don't want to pay a guy for 2 years when we already have so many roster spots, I would rather get a guy who we can cut tomorrow if we need to.
Yes, exactly. So if you're the Celtics, you give up that pick, and then from what I've heard at least, Enes Kanter had a player option on his deal, and he could have opted out and just joined free agency this year. And they asked Enes Kanter, I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of GMs that do this in the first place, so props to Danny Ainge for even going to Enes Kanter and asking him, but asked him, would you like to play for either the Grizzlies or the Blazers? If it's just the Grizzlies, it's going to be a straight-up trade. We're going to hand you off to him. We're going to get a trade exception for you. And if you go to the Blazers, they're going to send off Mario Hezonja to the Grizzlies, and then you can go play for the Blazers. And he said, I would like to go back to Portland.
By back to Portland, 2 years ago, he had a great stint with the Blazers when Nurkic originally broke his leg. Kanter stepped in and was their 5 on a team that went to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, he was originally brought in to be the backup center for Nurkic that season, and it was he was waived, and so he was one of those guys that we picked up mid-season, just off the waiver wire or whatever. And so he comes in, and Nurkic breaks his leg. I want to say it's 2 or 3 games into even having Canner, and then Canner immediately steps into the starting lineup and was just awesome with us. He is I've said this before about other guys, but he was a great citizen. He had a great attitude. He loved being in Portland. He felt like
he made that very
appreciated.
clear too on social media. He made it very clear that he liked Portland a lot.
Yeah.
I remember that distinctively.
I think that he just really enjoys being valued. I think people in Portland value like role players and rotation players more than like your Los Angeles fans are probably like, oh, we love our star players. Like in Portland's like, yeah, when Will Barton was on our team, he was our second round pick. We loved Will Barton. Like I kept reading articles about Will Barton and stuff. It's like with Enes Kanter, he comes in and people automatically know who he is and they love him and they appreciate him. And so I think, is going to be a huge piece to our team going forward as the backup for Nurk, and is going to be a great backup center for us.
I would agree. And then you add another backup big in Harry Giles.
Yeah. Young kid, only 22 years old. I'll be honest, I didn't know a whole lot about Harry Giles outside of the fact that he was the number 1 prospect in his high school class before he tore both.
His high school tape is unreal.
Oh, yeah. It's real good. He makes people look terrible.
He's a shell of himself now.
Yes. So he tore his ACL twice in the same knee, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
Which is common. When you tear it in one knee, your odds double of tearing it again.
So that, I mean, that's just horrible for a kid that's going to be the number 1
you lose
pick
a
in
lot
the
of
draft.
bounce.
And yeah, so funny enough, he actually was an original pick of the Trailblazers, which we traded that pick and another pick to move up for Zach Collins, but he was a Trailblazer at one point in time. He's now coming back to the Trailblazers, only 22 years old, came to us on a minimum, which I was shocked that the Kings just let him go on a minimum, because I was looking around on different Kings blog posts and like the Kings subreddit and whatnot, and everyone was just so upset that they lost Harry Giles for nothing. So I feel really good about the fact that he's coming in as the very least our backup big center and power forward.
And you add Melo. You
Yes.
bring Melo back.
Bringing Melo back is arguably going to be the best thing that happened to us, I think. I've raved about him. We said that we thought he was going to go to the Lakers. He ended up being loyal and just being like, hey, this team gave me a chance when no one else would. I would like to go and play one more season with the Blazers. I would not be surprised to see him leave and go to a championship team next year. But the fact that he wants to come and play for us, even with not a guarantee of starting. Supposedly, Melo said, I would like to have the chance to start if I'm playing well enough. And we're like, fair enough, but are you okay with coming off the bench? And Melo, supposedly,
unlike Melo,
said, yeah, as long, I'm happy playing with these guys. I think that he's fairly well revered within the team. Everyone sees him as the Hall of Famer that he is, and not as
truly is.
Yeah, and not like they don't see him as like, oh, he's a washed up guy. Like if you're going to, I think when he played with the Thunder and the Rockets, it's kind of like, oh, he's another guy, like whatever. But with Portland, we don't have guys that come here with his stature very often. So it's like, oh my gosh, Melo, I don't even care if it's a shell of himself. It's just great to have his name on our roster. And I think he really felt appreciated like that. So Melo is going to end up being a huge pickup for us, if for no other reason that he's going to be a good leader and he's going to be able to just absolutely cook people off the bench. My guess is that he probably finishes games next to Rocco.
Yeah, I mean, he is still one of the better ISO scorers in the NBA. You put him in the mid post and that guy's going to get a bucket.
Yeah.
Like it's just going to happen.
Yeah. I was literally looking at one of his highlights the other day. He scored 27 points in his last game in the bubble when we lost to the Lakers. The guy put up 27 points. It's nice to have a guy on your team that can put up 27 points.
Not a lot of guys can do that.
No, there's not.
So we've talked about your moves, right? We've talked about what we are going to like, what has happened. Let's talk about this upcoming year. What are your expectations as a Blazer fan? I'll come in with the unbiased side of things, but for you, what to you is a successful season and what to you is an unsuccessful season?
Okay. So a successful season would be I'll start off with saying to stay healthy and actually see,
barring health. Let's take health out of it. Let's say
okay,
let's
take,
say that this is your roster, because honestly any team can get hurt and that throws a wrench in everything.
That's fair.
But
That's
like
totally
barring
fair.
an injury to one of your vital guys, let's talk about what you think.
Okay. So I will say that I think this team should believe that they are a championship contender. I think you have to go in with that mindset that we have a real chance at a championship. I'm not saying they're going to win the championship. I'm just saying that you're Damian Lillard, you're leading that team. You're telling everyone in that locker room, like, this is the year. This is the year we have more depth than we've ever had. We've had more veteranship. We have just enough youth and exuberance, and we have a prime superstar and several like budding all-stars in CJ and Nurk that like maybe if we were really good, they make it in, but probably not.
In the East, they'd make it in.
In the East, they probably make it in. The West, they probably don't. So I would say you want to strive for a top 4 seed, and you want to make it to the second round. If you make it to the second round, it's still a successful season. We don't have the same kind of expectations in Portland that you would, I don't know, even like in Milwaukee right now, where it's like it's championship or bust. If you don't win a championship this year, it's a huge failure. Or with the Lakers, if you don't win a championship this year, it's a huge failure. If you're the Blazers, I think if you make it to the second round and really compete and show that you're a really good team, it is a successful season, and people will see it as a successful season. But I know that the players have their minds on something much higher, which is to say conference finals and championship.
Okay, and I would say that's fair. Top 4 seed in the West, like, and we've talked about this on other pods, like 3 through like 9, all could be top 4 seeds, and it's just gonna be a bloodbath.
Yeah,
and like anybody could come out on top. And give me Damian Lillard. Of course, I think I'm gonna be a top 4 seed. Like, and of course, I think getting out of the first round is doable because if you're, the 4 seed, you're playing the 5 seed. Mm-hmm. And those two teams could literally be a bloodbath. And again, give me Damian Lillard.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the second round, it's all based on matchups. And if you get a team that you can match up well against, maybe you get to the Western Conference Finals. If you get a team like, a team that you don't match up well against, then maybe you just try to force some games and see what happens.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you, especially when it comes to matchups in the playoffs. I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year, more than any other year, because your 8 seed, your 9 seed is good enough talent-wise to compete with your 2 seed and your 3 seed. It is really not that big of a difference between all of those middle teams that should be in the playoffs in the West. It is just going to be, you said it yourself, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. And it's going to be so hard. It's going to come down to matchups. The thing that I love the most about what the Blazers have done this offseason is that I'm not going to say that they're matchup proof, but I will say that they are more versatile now than they've ever been in the Damian Lillard era to actually match up with any other team. You put us up against the Lakers, all of a sudden we can throw Nurk, Canner, Giles, Collins, Rocco, Derrick Jones Jr. at your Anthony Davis and LeBron Jameses. And it's like, last year, we're just got our fingers crossed hoping Mario Hezonja
You started winning Gabriel.
Yeah, we started winning Gabriel to play against LeBron James. Like, we're not going to win. It's very simple that we're not going to win games against the Lakers like that. But you have all this height and athleticism and guys that can play multiple positions and can switch spots. All of a sudden, I'm not going to say we're matchup proof, but I will say that this is definitely the team that has the style of basketball that could fit in today's NBA, which is playing against a lot of different styles.
Yes, this team can match up against anybody. If Stotts wants to be, and Stotts being your head coach, wants to be fluid in his starting lineup, he can start, 7-8 guys based on matchups.
Yeah, I would say Gary Trent Jr. is a good starter, would be a solid starter. Rodney Hood could be a solid starter. Obviously, Carmelo Anthony could be a really solid starter.
Zach Collins.
I was going to say Zach Collins was our starting power forward last year. I mean, we all of a sudden have a whole array of different lineups that we can throw out there, and that's what makes me really excited.
Well, you can go big with like Nurkic and Collins, or you can go small with like, you could even start like
Rocco at the 5.
Rocco and Derrick Jones Jr. Like, you can go big, you can go small, you can go where you need to switch everything, you can go where you can need to pound in the paint. Like, this team has a lot of options. It's just one of those things where, like, can you put it together and can you make it work for a season?
That's the key. That is 100% the key because, like we said, Stotts has never had a team like this. It's always been very obvious who his starters were. It's always been very obvious who he was going to be rolling with. And so it is going to be interesting this year to see Stotts. I would argue that Terry Stott's thing that he is worst at is his lineup management, which is what worries me going into this season with all of the different types of lineups you can go with. My guess is he's probably running 11 deep to start the season just to like tinker and see what's going on. But it's a shortened season. You got to figure out what is your team, what is your lineup going into the, later part of the season and into the playoffs. You got to know who your guys are. So it's not a whole lot of time to tinker.
Yeah. And before we get into our final thoughts on the Blazers, I want to revisit Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. We have talked about it a little bit at the beginning. I have had like 6 glasses, and that's hyperbole. I've had 3, but it's candy, man.
It's easy drinking. It is very, very easy drinking. It's a pre-mixed drink in a bottle.
It really is. It really is. It's a rum and Coke without the Coke.
Yeah. Exactly. And, when you go and do old fashions, you're going to put some agave or some simple syrup or whatever in it. This is the same premise, but it's got a nice honey flavor to it. If you're like a real aficionado and like, oh, I refuse to drink some flavored whiskey, then maybe you won't like it. But my guess is that the average drinker takes a sip of Tennessee Honey with no ice, no mixer whatsoever, and they like it.
I would agree. Every person that drinks this is going to get the sweetness. You get the obvious amounts of honey. You get the just like easiness of it that allows it to just go down smooth. It's happened to me before. You can drink a whole bottle and be like, wait, where'd it go?
Yeah, this is actually the bottle that I lost in a bet to you.
Yes, it is.
Good old professional bull riding.
Please explain.
So Ethan and I work for a channel that primarily focuses on rodeo. And your average bull rider probably does not ride. At least in our experience, that maybe 1 in 10 bull riders actually sit on the bull for a full 8 seconds. So we made a bet as to how many bull riders would make it through one particular rodeo.
And this was about, I think it was 36 bull riders going.
Yeah, I believe the over-under was 7.5.
Nope, it was 9.5.
I gave you 9.5. I was like, oh, I got this in the bag.
1 in 3 people are going to ride tonight. And I was like, you know what? Today's the day, damn it.
And it was. It was the day. So that is why I owed Ethan 1 bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey.
It was amazing. And just a little other snippet on Tennessee Honey. It is growing.
Growing, really?
Sales of Tennessee Honey are up 36% in the last year.
Really?
Yes. It is 8%. It grew Jack Daniel's overall brand 8%.
Really?
People are buying it.
Honestly, it doesn't.
People are buying it.
Doesn't totally surprise me.
My kin. My people.
Your people. No, I really enjoy it. Like I said, anyone can drink this.
Anyone over the age of 21 can drink this.
It's a good disclaimer. We should probably say that at the beginning of our podcast. You gotta be 21 to drink alcohol.
Anyone can drink this.
Unless you don't live in America and you live in Europe, drink at 15. I don't know what your rules
Whatever.
are.
Okay. So, I have a couple of haymaker questions to hit you with as we wrap up the pod.
All right, hit me.
Damian Lillard's obviously your favorite player on the Blazers.
Yep.
Going forward, take Damian Lillard out. Who's your second favorite Blazer on this team and why?
Okay. My heart really wants to go towards Nurk, especially for the whole he snapped his leg in half and came back, and then game 1 already was playing the exact same caliber of basketball that he was playing. I love Nurk. I love he's completely changed his attitude. When he first came to the Blazers, I actually was saying that I didn't love him. I was like, oh, he's kind of a whiner and he's not really going to buy into our system, and why are we giving up Mason Plumlee for him? And he has totally made me eat my words. So much love to Nurk. I love Nurk. That being said, there is one guy on this team that I have 100% bought into, and that is Gary Trent Jr.
I knew this was coming.
Love Gary Trent Jr., man. Every time he makes a shot, I'm like, Gary! It probably has a lot to do with the fact that he shares a lot of qualities with one of my old favorite Blazers, which is Wesley Matthews, where he's just a tough, nose to the ground, not afraid of anybody or anything or any situation. He's in his second year as a second as a second round draft pick, and he's stepped up huge this year. Anthony Simons was supposed to be the guy. I mean, Ethan will tell the story a million times about how I hyped up Anthony Simons.
Mitch guaranteed that Anthony Simons would be a Hall of Famer and a All-Star this upcoming year. So in 2021, he guaranteed that Anthony Simons would be an All-Star. So if he's not, everyone just boo him with me, because I was like, are you crazy?
All right. I may have gotten the timeline wrong a little bit. But, so Anthony obviously has not lived up to expectations, especially last season. We'll see what happens with him this year. But Gary Trent Jr. is the guy that I am all in on. He is such a tough kid. He is such a good defender. He is hitting threes at a crazy rate in the bubble. Love me, Gary Trent Jr.
All right, last question.
Okay.
Biggest X factor this year. Biggest guy who's going to come out and just going to be the difference maker.
Okay. I'm going to say Rodney Hood. I think that that's a bit of like a sleeper X factor. I think it'd be pretty easy to say Robert Covington, because he's pretty much going to be 50% of our defense, with Nurk being the other 50%. I think you could say Derek Jones Jr., because I think they're planning on giving him a lot of minutes. But Rodney Hood last year was so good for us. We were still a winning basketball team when Rodney was in our starting lineup. And then when he went down, that's when everything fell apart. I think that he comes back. I think that players are now starting to come back from their Achilles injuries a little bit better than the past. It's almost like with the ACL tear 5 to 10 years ago was a death sentence. But because of modern science and like people being able to work with those ACL tears, now you see guys like Adrian Peterson that can come back and make huge comebacks. I'm thinking that Achilles tears are going to be around the same sort of thing, where it may be a death sentence. Maybe he comes back and he's just a shell of himself, is not the same at all. But I think that he can come back and still shoot 40% from three and be a great bench player, and probably be in our closing lineup for a lot of games, because we really trust Rodney. I love Rodney. Good old Hoodie, man.
Well, everyone, that is our Blazers podcast. We've done a deep dive on them. You've heard from the man himself, the tall guy who's
I got to talk a lot in this
breathes and sleeps Blazers. Yeah. My vocal cords are feeling pretty good right now. I don't know about you. I mean, I've been over here guzzling this whiskey, so I'm more than happy to let you talk. But another one down, 2 favorites podcast. We got Tennessee Honey, we got the Blazers. What more could we want?
Oh, nothing, man. This is the best.
Cheers, brothers.
Cheers.